Now, to start, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce briefly our panelists. Directly, or on the far end, of my left, is Fortune Senior Editor-at-Large Pattie Sellers, who has written more than 20 Fortune cover stories and is the genius behind Fortune's Most Powerful Women in Business, leading the program since its launch in 1998. Among uncountable other activities, Pattie is also co-founder and executive director of the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit, the preeminent gathering of women leaders in business and beyond. Welcome, Pattie, and I leave it to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to Jan Fields and other women who I know from our Most Powerful Women community who are out here, and thank you for coming. Leigh Gallagher, who I'm going to introduce first. Leigh and I are very close friends at Fortune. I've been there for 30 years. Leigh has been at Fortune for 7 years. She is a co-chair of the Most Powerful Women Summit and a co-chair of our new Most Powerful Women Next Gen. In her and an assistant managing editor at Fortune who kind of does everything, and in her spare time, last year, she published a fantastic book called The End of the Suburbs. And it's funny because Leigh and I have, we're kind of taking this is only number 2, but we've taken this little show on the road in February in my hometown of Allentown, Pennsylvania, where there's a friend of mine is doing a huge billion-dollar redevelopment, downtown redevelopment project. Leigh and I interviewed Leigh in Allentown, which was really fun. Leigh is a Pennsylvania girl. She's from Media, PA. And so this is fun. Thanks for doing this, Leigh. Mitchell Krebs is the president and chief executive officer of Coeur Mining, which is the largest US-based primary silver producer in the United States and a very large gold producer as well. He's here because he moved his company from Idaho to Chicago and is based now right here on Michigan Avenue, so we're going to hear why he decided to do that. Speaking of cities, Mitch is from Storm Lake, Iowa. Population 8,000. And Jaana, Remes is Remes the way you pronounce your last name? Yeah. Remes. Jaana is principal at the McKinsey Global Institute, which is McKinsey and Company's business and economics research arm based in San Francisco. We just met. And in the spirit of talking about cities, Jaana is from Helsinki, Finland. So welcome all. And we're going to open it up for questions fairly early, so think about what you would like to ask this very interesting, diverse group. I'm going to actually start out by asking Leigh, what is the basic premise of The End of the Suburbs?
Good question, Pattie. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and I want to thank Donna and Brian and the Economic Club of Chicago for having me here in this wonderful city that really is so exemplary of so many of the trends that I write about in many different ways. So the basic premise of the book, The End of the Suburbs, is that after many years of developing our country in this sort of one-size-fits-all landscape, the kind of American suburbs, the notion of the American suburbs, which is so key to the kind of, it's a fundamental pillar of the American lifestyle, the American dream, which started out to mean equality of opportunity and turned into mean a house. This whole, notion and physical existence of the suburbs had started to fail to deliver on its promises in a number of different ways, and is not really the way of arrangement that will sustain us going forward in the future. And this is happening for a number of different reasons and in a number of different ways, but just to tick over a couple of them, the demographics of our country are changing dramatically. our birth rates falling, our marriage rates falling, the nuclear family, for whom the 60 or 70 million single-family houses in this country were built for, is rapidly becoming a minority household type. There are changes in preferences. People are craving community, which many suburbs have, but many don't anymore. People are craving a more kind of, environmental concerns play a part, but that's not a huge aspect of what I covered. And then the other side of the equation is that cities have become much more wonderful places to live. 50 years ago, cities were manufacturing centers. They were spewing noxious fumes. The crime was through the roof. People in New York went out with muggers' money because they just couldn't go outside. And that's just night and day to today. Here in Chicago, in New York, in anything that calls itself a city right now is in some form of revitalization. So all those things combined led me to think that this was a pretty seismic idea. And so, there are many wonderful suburbs still. It doesn't mean if you live in a suburb. Who here lives in a suburb? It's okay, okay. Great. I always like to know what I'm dealing with.
How many people live, who lives in the city? Ooh,
wow. Exhibit
that
A.
is surprising to me. Is that surprising to you?
A little bit. It's a little bit surprising because Chicago actually has wonderful suburbs. I always say when I talk about my book in the Northeast, I live in New York City, I'm from Philadelphia. The Northeast is so densely packed and the cities are so large that we're spoiled with really good suburbs there, and I think that's the case here too. The suburbs of Chicago, I call them the John Hughes suburbs because I grew up watching all the John Hughes movies and they all took place in Winnetka and Highland Park or, all of those places, and they're beautiful. So anyway, it's a little surprising, though. I did not expect all those city hands.
So Leigh, I want to get to Mitch, but I want you to, so you talked about the end of or the decline of the suburbs, and you mentioned the cities are often better communities. People are craving communities, and many suburbs are not providing that. But take us to the other side. What does this mean for cities across America?
Well, cities right now are just incredibly resplendent. And I mean, in New York City, we've just seen, in September, we saw the sale of the first condo, a record, for $124 million. I mean, there is a real other side of this argument that is not a positive direction. But
unless you have $124 million.
And then it's great. But cities are more families with young children are staying in cities than ever before. You see that in New York City. I bring up New York a lot because it's where I live. You talk about what you know. But the neighborhood of Tribeca is now called Triburbia. The schools are bursting at the seams. It's just, crime has gone down so much in New York that there was the most recent round of data came out a few months ago, and the New York Post led with the sentence, "Welcome to Mayberry, NYC." And so we're really seeing a reversal of, meanwhile, poverty and crime in the suburbs across the country is through the roof. So we're seeing all these reversals happen that is just really fascinating.
So Mitch, why did you move your company to Chicago? And take us through that process, if you could.
Yeah. Thanks again to the Economic Club of Chicago for the opportunity to be here. I'm honored to be a part of such a distinguished panel here. Our decision to move the headquarters to Chicago was driven more than anything by access. Being a silver and gold mining company with mines in Alaska all the way down through Argentina, and then we sell our silver and gold into Asia, and over into Europe. So having access to all those places, north and south, east and west, was a big driver. And in northern Idaho, that access was just not available to us. And so as a global company, we really needed to be in a global city, and Chicago definitely meets that criteria. Also, access to people. We're a company that has grown up a lot over the last few years, and having access to the kind of people and the talent and the deep talent that a city like Chicago has been huge for us. We took the opportunity to really start with a blank sheet of paper when we moved here to Chicago organizationally. Of the 80 people we have in our headquarters almost 65, I think, of them are new. And for us to be somewhere where we can, anytime we need to hire somebody, we're literally getting hundreds of applications now for these positions. And even though we're a mining company, it's important to remember that about 2/3 of the people that we employ at our headquarters are non-technical. So they're not geologists, they're not mining people, they're human resource professionals, IT, finance and accounting, and those types of skill sets here in a place like Chicago are very deep, very talented, and very, very driven. So those are a couple of the main reasons.
So why Chicago versus Denver or another city that would make sense for a mining company?
Yeah, great question. I get that one a lot. And,
I figured that wasn't original.
Yeah. Two reasons. One, although we're in a commodity business, it's important, I think, to try and put forth a product that differentiates ourselves when competing for human capital. And being another mining company in Denver or another mining company in Toronto just sort of puts us one of many. And this is an industry that has been a chronic underperformer. It's not been a very good shareholder-friendly place to be for people over the years. It's been a huge destroyer of capital. And so when I became the CEO 3 years ago, my mandate was really to find a better way, to find a different way to actually create some value for our shareholders. And by standing out and being different and being willing to say that we are going to try a different way in an industry that has not been very successful historically, I thought a city that reflects that philosophy was important. The other reason too is demographics. You mentioned, Leigh, demographics. Our industry it's kind of a barbell. There are a lot of people within about 5 years of retirement, and then there are a lot of young people who have come into the industry over the last few years when metals prices have been going up, and it's attracted a lot of talent into our industry, but not a lot of people in the middle. And a place like Chicago really positions us well with both groups. I can't believe how many people we've had move here or join the company who are empty nesters. Within 5 years of retirement, they've bought a condo, they're living in the city, they're loving all the variety and alternatives that a place like Chicago offers, healthcare. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you should see the enthusiasm now when we're going to college campuses and talking to young people about being able to work in this industry in a place like Chicago. It's nothing, there's no one else that has that kind of a value proposition to the younger people, and they're loving coming and having that kind of a work-life mix.
That's so interesting. So of those 65 people at your headquarters of 80 people who are new, and by the way, when did you move here officially?
Last September, so just over a year.
Just over a year.
Yes.
So you have 65 new people in your headquarters. Approximately how many of those would you classify as young people and empty nesters?
Both together?
Yeah, both.
Would be almost all.
Almost all.
Yeah.
That is really interesting.
I mean, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 people in our office that are in the, call it early 50s phase of their life. Most people are 60, 65 and over, or else out of school and mid-20s.
Interesting. So Jaana, how do you see Chicago in your work in understanding what makes successful, truly global cities, thriving global cities? How do you look at Chicago?
I may be a little biased. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It's such a joy for me always to return to Chicago. I must confess, my husband was a graduate student at the University of Chicago. So even at that time, there's a part of me that really still goes for, it was the prime time of the Bulls. And even the graduate students of the humanities were watching. So anyway, there's part of me that's a little biased towards Chicago. So looking at the global growth prospects going forward, and clearly the fact that the landscape for cities is global today, it's no longer regional. Chicago, I think, is in a very strong position It is the one city amongst all the advanced economies that's going to cross the 10 million population line in the next 10 or 15 years, and it's going to become one of the new mega cities. That's happening mostly in emerging markets now. And even though there are a lot of challenges on the global economy overall, the world is not as flat as some people argue, in a sense that large cities actually now have access to talent, to businesses, to investments from all over the world. So in many ways, I think if you look at Europe, you can see how London has been rising as more mobility amongst both elderly as well as the youth is happening. I think that kind of an opportunity is very much available for cities like Chicago. In a way, if you can build on the many strengths you have a very solid business community that actually works very well together and with the city. And businesses like to be in places where other businesses are, just like you were saying. I actually would argue that the century of cities is a great opportunity for Chicago, even if
the what of cities is a great opportunity, did you say?
The century of cities, that's one of the things that people argue, that this is the
century of cities.
Exactly, the nation states have been the dominant organization for the world for the last 200 years, I would say. And now many people argue that it's going to be a century of cities, that cities are going to determine their own futures going forward. So I am very bullish for Chicago.
And Leigh, how do you see, I mean, you're a business journalist and you look probably above all at the move of companies in and out of cities. So where does Chicago stand in your mind?
Chicago was the first biggest, and at the time I was writing the book, only real example of where this, at the time, very nascent trend was starting to appear. And this has now been documented by others as well, but this is big, that these big companies are leaving their big fortressy suburban office parks and moving into downtowns. It's an incredible trend, and they're doing it, as Mitch said, it's largely an HR move. It is so people can attract the talent that they need to sustain their companies. So here in Chicago, and these are not small companies, United Airlines, and this room probably knows everyone, all these examples, Motorola Mobility, Sara Lee, which is now Hillshire Brands, Archer Daniels Midland, GE Transportation. I have a list because it's too long. These are just incredible examples. Morningstar. So Chicago is sort of the pinnacle of this trend, and it's happening elsewhere too. In New York City, or around New York City, the US headquarters of Panasonic was in a suburban office park in Secaucus, and they moved to Newark, a big gleaming skyscraper in downtown Newark, which that's sort of an aggressive move because Newark is maybe the only city in America that's still a little bit challenged. But, and the CEO said this, I saw him at the reception opening the building, and I said, you know, you're at the forefront of this trend. And he said, yeah, but it's easy to do it in Chicago. It's easy to do it in Manhattan. Find me another CEO that's doing this in Newark. So that's a great example. And then, I mean, I keep a running list. I mean, there's Zappos, which left suburban Henderson, Nevada to go to downtown Las Vegas, where Tony Hsieh is actually doing much more than just moving his company there. Jeff Bezos recently said that he doesn't think Amazon could have thrived the way it did if it wasn't in downtown Seattle. Denver is now drawing, the Lodo neighborhood of Denver is drawing the companies like the new milling division of ConAgra. And then, of course, in San Francisco, all of the hot startups these days are no longer starting up in Silicon Valley. They're starting up in San Francisco proper. So this is a really, I love, you know, being at Fortune with Pattie, we always look at big business to, you know, where is wealth moving? Where is the money moving? Where is the engine of the economy moving? And in many ways, you know, it's moving back to cities because one of the reasons it went out to the suburbs was because that's where everybody wanted to live. Especially, you know, the rumor or the word always was that it was because the CEOs wanted to live in the suburbs, but it was everyone. So, and now that's starting to reverse, as well as retailers. I mean, every single retailer imaginable has some kind of smaller, slender version of itself to squeeze into an urban location, from Walmart to Walgreens to, you know, Michael's Crafts. I mean, you name it, Home Depot. We in New York City now have
Neiman Marcus moving to Manhattan.
Yeah, exactly. So Manhattan has become more, you know, suburban in a way with all these big chain stores.
Yeah.
So.
What makes and what breaks a global megacity? And let's define a global megacity first. What is a global megacity?
Well, it's a very technical term. It means you have more than 10 million inhabitants, so that's a very easy answer. And what makes and what breaks, I think I would just like to very much build on what you say. Chicago is number 10 amongst all global cities by the number of billion-dollar revenue or more companies headquartered here. And in many ways, you are the second city in the US, significantly above Los Angeles, I think. And great megacities that become great.
Chicago is number 10.
Number 10.
In billion-dollar revenue companies.
In the world.
In the world. And Los Angeles is not on that list, did you say?
Los Angeles is below
So
Chicago.
it's not in the
New
top
York
10.
Exactly. It's not in the top 10.
New York is number 1.
New York is number
Okay.
2, I think.
And what is number 1?
I can't believe I'm blanking on this one because I'm getting it wrong. Is it New York or is it? Let me get back to you on that one. I should have known that one. I think it's. Is it New York or London? I'll come back to
Okay, New York or London. Okay, but Chicago is number 10. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And what makes a great megacity is it really is the fact that it is a city that's able to build a great, if you want, bone structure of infrastructure, transportation, etc., that really enables the growth of the muscle of people and businesses around them. And I think it's that combination, in a way, a strong bone structure that allows the city to live and evolve as things change. And I think that really is the key.
And what is in that, okay, I love that, the great bone structure, which you said infrastructure, transportation, that enables the sort of muscle to develop. So what else is in the bone structure?
It's largely about how do you have your transport, your education, and then housing around it and businesses, so that it's actually a city that is sustainable for the long term, and it provides opportunities to everyone. Because typically when you have challenges in the basic functioning, it costs the least fortunate the most. They're the ones who commute the most, pay the cost of pure education, etc. And I think that's one of the key pieces. At the same time, it creates a really dynamic capacity of the city to renew and attract the new folks. Because at the end of the day, it is the people who will make or break a megacity. And I think if you're thinking about how to be the global megacity, you really do need to think about where the global talent, where the global young talent is going to come from, where the global businesses are going to grow and expand, and how you're going to connect to those parts, exactly as you were saying. And all of those things will make, if you want, the magic, which is the fact that you think
and if it's
what
the
this would be.
people, sort of the muscle, if it's the people who can make or break a global megacity, is there an example of a city that was sort of, broken because that aspect of it was not up to snuff?
I think there's a lot of cities. When you look at, for example, US cities, the performance of those cities is largely determined overall economic growth on the capacity to attract people. So in a way, cities that start to decline are cities that start to lose folks. And I think that will be even a bigger challenge going forward because of the fact that we'll see the great tsunami. So it is the cities that will be able to attract the young, the talented, the businesses that create the jobs for those young and talented to come and stay that will make a big difference.
Thoughts? Mitch, Leigh?
Certainly from our perspective, coming to a city where I think there's 30 of the Fortune 500 companies headquartered here, as a young CEO, for me to be in a community like this where I have access to this huge network of professionals and of leaders who are the best minds, best business minds in the country, in the world, is selfishly a huge advantage for me. And it's a community here, and Jeff's going to owe me a beer talking about World Business Chicago, but one of the big reasons we came here was having an organization like World Business Chicago and engaging with them early on in the selection process of a city, of a headquarters city, made a huge difference because it showed me just how well Chicago does work. You were talking about some of the bones. The business sector here, combined with the public sector, the educational community, I don't know if it's unique among U.S. cities. It seems like it is to me to have so many people kind of pulling in the same direction for a city. And to me, that really stood out when we were looking at other locations.
I'll add that, the infrastructure is incredibly important here, and I think that's something that is it's difficult to get right, but it's so critical. And so I mean, Mitch was just saying before we were chatting, and he said one of the reasons that this is a great move for him is that being in Coeur d'Alene, he had to drive to Spokane, Washington, which added a night to the trip just to get a flight. And so he estimates, I'm speaking for you here, if that's okay, that he saved 2 weeks of time a year just because by virtue of all the travel he has to do. So being here near O'Hare is dramatically different. In a way, that's exactly what, you know, I write a lot about the commute in people's day-to-day lives and what that does to them time-wise. And so you saw that. But I think having access to, you know, O'Hare and Midway and the expansion of O'Hare now, that's a huge critical part of this. And along those lines, public transit as well. And I know there's some efforts here to redo the subway cars, or the, what is it, is it the L, sorry. I know that from ER. My lens of all of this stuff is through television and popular culture, but that's okay. But that's critical because millennials, another huge trend of all this is that we were talking about at the table, is that millennials, these millennials who are poor kids are so studied, but they don't like to drive, they don't have this love affair with the car, they're gonna be using more and more public transit, as we all are, and that puts more strain on that system, so that has to be really, really great. But it's good for companies because you can work on the train. You can't work when you're commuting. So you're gonna get another, you know, half hour on either end of everybody, yeah, you know, on their commute once there's 4G in the, it's a very good point. So.
Right. Who has a question? And wait for the mic, please, and please identify yourself. Okay, over here, we'll just wait for the mic.
Hi, my name's Michael Krause, and if I were elected governor or re-elected governor of Illinois tomorrow, what would I do to enhance the city of Chicago and keep building it as a megacity?
Well, first of all, continue to do everything that's working in Chicago. I think that's something that building on one's strengths is always a great place to start. I think the one thing that, as I already mentioned, it is the next generation that in the longer term will matter, the people who will lead the city going forward. So I think education, as I'm sure in most cities in the US, and I don't think it comes as a surprise, that would be the other big priority.
Go ahead.
I would say schools. I mean, the education system in our cities is not where it needs to be. The #1 reason people move to the suburbs is because of the schools. That's why a zillion and one people told me, I interviewed lots of people that lived in the suburbs, and so many people said, I'm only here until the kids are done with school. And that's not a reason to live somewhere. I mean, it is, but you should be more satisfied than that. But anyway, that's one reason why that, you know, schools in New York have gotten a lot better. I don't know about Chicago, but it's, you know, that's an issue. And that sort of relates to the fiscal crisis that many cities are still in. And it's funny, I mean, a city can still be in a fiscal crisis, but yet have a glistening economy and wonderful cities coming to it. I mean, we're seeing this in New York. So those two things are kind of decoupled in an odd way, but in the end, all those things need to be solved.
I would just add, from a pro-business standpoint, and this sounds, it's much easier said than done, but red tape, the ability to easily form businesses, it was, for me, surprising coming here, like I suppose any big city. There's just a lot of regulatory burden to work through to establish a presence here.
If I could just add to this, we also estimate that red tape alone delays time and increases significant cost on returns on public investments, on infrastructure and everything else. So it really is a lever not just for businesses, but it is a lever for improving financial efficiency of the cities.
And can I just add one point to that?
Sure.
Also, you know, this is why a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs are rushing to Detroit right now because there's no red tape right now. And that's a window that's going to end at some point. And so we had a column on Fortune earlier this year written by Andreas Duani, the urbanist, and he coined Detroit a pink zone right now. And he just said this is where
what zone?
A pink zone.
Pink
because
zone.
It's not red, it's pink. And so, you know, rush in because, you know, you have to take that kind of risk. And he said it's always the entrepreneurs who rush in first, and then it's the, you know, he did a whole graduated thing, and then like the last people are like the dentists that come in because it's totally established. Nothing against dentists, but, you know, but it's a good contrast.
So Mitch, what I'm thinking here is that we all know that in any, and we as journalists, you know, see this all the time, you know, deals succeed or happen and don't because of like little tiny personal relation things between two negotiators. And as you looked at various cities, is there anything that anyone did here that made a difference or was meaningful to you?
I'll tell a story. I think I was starting to tell you this upstairs. My wife and I had a child, our second, a year and a half ago when we were going through the city selection process. It was February of 2013. And the third phone call I got after he was born was from the mayor here. I don't know how he got my cell phone. And it was, congratulations on your son, O'Hare, O'Hare, O'Hare. So now, we named our son Ram Jr. and we're all square. But that tone from the top, though, that leadership, he sets definitely he sets a tone here in this city of competitiveness, aggressiveness, and
personal
that made a big
commitment,
difference.
Right?
Absolutely.
And personal passion.
I was scared to say no to him. I didn't.
Yeah. We have a question over here.
Hello, I'm Rishi Shah. I'm curious if you're seeing any trends or changes in these megacities in real estate pricing and development. So the form it takes, residential or commercial, but particularly residential in some of these megacities to cater to the two tail ends of that demographic. And if you're seeing any changes there and how you project will keep more people in the cities around the asset pricing and development.
That is a real challenge. It is very clear. I think London is perhaps the extreme because it happens to be not a place where not just Europeans, but a lot of the emerging market countries want to live. But when you look at the global flow on real estate in the last 12 months or so, 3 out of the 5 top cities actually are in the US. So in many ways, it is a challenge. And I think it's exactly
What are
the
those
story.
cities?
London, New York, and do you know what? I should have looked this up before. I can't remember if it was. I think it's Chicago, but I may be wrong. So I think I need to check that one on.
I don't mean to put you on the spot here.
I know. I
your
should
stuff,
have my fact sheet with me. But the challenge really is that as the world is getting so much more open, and there is particularly a lot of the financing flow is going to come from the emerging markets, they are really looking where to go, and they're looking to diversify. In many ways, they're looking for new opportunities for their families. There's very different reasons why many of those businesses move. And the interesting thing for cities like Chicago is that in many of those regions, the world map of big cities that matter is not as well defined as it is in the US and Western world. I always love reading the stories in newspapers about the little store that got known through a blog in China, and now all the Chinese tourists come here. So in many ways, shaping the expectations of what the world students or investors are thinking about is happening right now as we speak. Of course, the challenge is how do you manage then the costs locally, and I think we just published, and not to advertise, but we just published a report on affordable housing. There's a lot one can do to create more land and improve the production process to really reduce that cost. And I think it's something that's a block and tackle by city, by neighborhood, and I think it's one of the big challenges for the big cities. But I think there is a lot better we can do on both fronts.
I think that New York is a prime example of this, and again, I come back to this $124 million apartment. New York, this will destroy a city if it becomes a single-class silo of wealthy people that is the direct opposite of what a city should be, which is a knitting together of such a diverse, income levels, industries, everything. And that's really at the risk of people are leaving New York who can no longer afford to live there. And by that I mean, hipsters who used to live in the Village and then they moved to Brooklyn, and now Brooklyn they can't even afford because Toll Brothers just put up a building with a pet washing station in addition to every other amenity you can imagine. The working class, I have heard that many members of the working class that lived in Brooklyn have moved to the Poconos, where you can get a single family house for under $100,000. And this was where, during the housing boom, the drive to you qualify zone, this is 2 hours from New York City. And so it's an inversion that's happening. And I think that if it's not attended to, in New York, Mayor Bloomberg tried to do these micro apartments, which are 500 square feet, little boxes designed for the millennials, and they're much more affordable. I mean, I don't know if that's the answer, but something needs to be done. I mean, Mayor Bloomberg called New York a luxury product, and that's really what it feels like.
Yes, right here.
Gabrielle Lyon with the Chicago Architecture Foundation. I was wondering if you could talk about this issue in a little bit more depth in terms of how do we have a global city that really is for everyone? So affordable housing is one. Are there examples where people are doing this well in cities nationally, internationally, to make sure there's socioeconomic diversity as cities get healthier and stronger, as you've described?
Yeah. Affordable housing is a topic. For example, did you know that in Singapore, 70% of people live in public housing? It is in very different price ranges, but in many ways, there are many cities in the world that actually do a lot more on affordable housing, and there's different techniques, but I think Singapore is definitely a city that is very thoughtful in identifying the kinds of lots in the urban areas, in the cities, but that are currently underused, and using different kinds of approaches to making sure that they are made the best of. Also, I think transport-oriented development, which is the fact that if you have a transport network for public transport, make sure all the land around them really takes advantage of the fact that that helps people commute. And I think affordable housing is one part. Making cities work for everyone really, I think, is about making sure city services work well. There is no such thing as a separate effort for improving just the most disadvantaged. It really is about making sure the public transport works, the schools work, their services work, because those, at the end of the day, as I said, they really bite the poorest folks who have fewer options the most.
I'll add, I mean, this isn't going to really answer your question, but another big trend, you know, my thesis isn't that everyone needs to rush and live in a skyscraper in Chicago or in New York City or anywhere. There's a huge trend afoot to sort of revolutionize our suburbs and make them more urban places to live and deliver a lot of the town centers and liveliness and hubs and kind of urbanization that was missing for so long from not all of our suburbs, but a lot of them. And so that's, you know, oftentimes a more affordable way to live in a place where there is a little bit, you're kind of near the center of some action. A little bit of Manhattan sprinkled, you know, near you is what people want.
And who's doing that well?
Well, there's someone here who's doing it well. John McClendon is in my book. He's a developer who's urbanizing, developing really original communities in Libertyville and also in Skokie. And these are developing, you know, they're single-family homes, but they're close together. They're right near a main street. And your first development, John, went up in the middle of the financial crisis and sold out within 18 months. And so there's a real demand for this kind of housing in the suburbs because it doesn't exist. And so there's a lot more activity of that nature happening everywhere. So there's that. And
is there a lot of this, I mean, so fantastic, Skokie, Libertyville, is this happening a lot across America?
It is, it's happening everywhere. And it's taking all different kinds of forms. I mean, a lot of developers are building almost these mini malls in the middle of nowhere with like a high-rise and advertising slogans that say, have you met your neighbors? You know, that's what you'll do if you live in our community. Some of them look like, yeah, like external shopping malls almost. Others are I was actually just in Frisco, Texas, which, has anybody ever been to Frisco, Texas? It's a very new place. It kind of went up in the past 10 years. And it is apparently the fastest growing place in the country,
really?
Which sort of goes against my thesis. But they're building little urban centers everywhere in Frisco so that you don't have to go into Dallas. And
really?
It's a fascinating place. But another thing that's happening is that a lot of the older suburbs that were built on the original town planning principles of more urbanism, it kind of inherently, our first early suburbs, places like the Chicago North Shore suburbs I mentioned, were built around railroad stations originally. So they have this kind of tighter knit design by nature, and those places are going to become more popular. Even kind of inner ring suburbs that were sort of leapfrogged out during development, those places, I talk a lot about the movie Silver Linings Playbook, again, a movie, but did everybody see that movie? I mean, the town that was filmed in is actually the town where my father grew up, outside of Philadelphia, and it's that kind of charming, close-knit, you know, they could walk to the movie theater where they got in that fight, and they
And what town is that, Leigh?
It was filmed, because Hollywood does this in a couple different places, but one of them was Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. And so that is, you know, a lot of people think that places like that are going to become more popular as demand to live in a, you know, an urbanist environment increases without being in the middle of a big city.
So what are your favorite cities? I want each of you to name your, and everybody's going to say Chicago. I have to say, staying in this hotel, Leigh and I were, when we got in last night, we were just dazzled. And we're not, you know, we're like two girls from New York. We were absolutely dazzled. We're dazzled by this, but, you know, our room, my room and Leigh's room are like right next to each other. And they look out onto the lake and Michigan Avenue and the trains this morning. I mean, it really is, like, we were just saying to each other, this is a real city. It really is fantastic. So, that said, you can't say Chicago. What is your favorite city in the world?
Do I have to go first?
Sure.
Well, the thing about living in New York is such a painfully difficult place to live in that it makes you appreciate almost everywhere else. I mean, it's really hard to live there. You have to like schlep your stuff with you all the time. So anyway, leaving that aside, I don't even know what to say. I mean, I lived in Paris for 6 months of my life, and that changed me. That's what made me become a city person, because I went there directly from the suburbs. And so that really did it for me. And it was that, I mean, you know, just natural, incredible, old, European, you know, tight-knit, you know, beautiful, jumbled together city that it was just so rich in so many things.
Yeah, it's so knitted together, Paris is. Mitch?
I was going to go with the European theme before you said Paris, I swear, but we sell some of our silver and gold doré to a refinery that's located outside of Zurich, Switzerland. Zurich's got a lot of charm. I mean, it's not a big city, but it's quaint, beautiful.
It is.
Quiet, orderly, clean.
It is, yeah.
That'd be my pick.
Jaana?
I must say, I have been at that discussion with my husband for the last 5 or so years. We are trying to decide where that would be. My husband is from Mexico. We have 2 California kids. I'm from Finland. So we have on this negotiation all the time. What would be the best city? And I think we have just agreed that there is no such thing, because every city is so unique. And I think my choice would be to spend part of the year in a few cities around the world. So that would be my answer.
Okay, we're going to go over here first.
Joel Henning, I'm a writer and a lawyer and other stuff. I'd like to ask, first of all, Mitch, but then all of you, to look a bit on what all of us, especially at the end of this dreadful political campaign, hear all the time, and that is the dark side. And I have friends, good friends, some of whom may be here, who are leaving Chicago. They're going to Louisville. They're going to Durham. Why? Taxes, our pension liabilities, both in the city and the state, and the other negative things. And first of all, Mitch, I'm sure you heard all this stuff when you were trying to decide where to move your company. I'm Chicago born and bred, and we're staying. But I'd like to hear how you decided to overcome those objections, and then I'd like to hear from the rest of you on that.
Yeah, sure. Again, another question I've gotten quite a bit is, including from a few of our board members, why would you want to move to a city and to a state with the fiscal challenges that Chicago and Illinois have? And yeah, it's a reality. It's a reality in our country. It's a reality globally in terms of deficits, debt. In a way, it's, as a gold and silver mining guy, you know, I sort of hope sometimes for bad news and bad things to happen. It's good for business. So I guess I moved right to you know, of that. But you know, mining is a very call it red state kind of industry. being here in what is more of a traditional, I guess, blue state, blue city, has opened up some doors for business that have been helpful. It's allowed us to put a face on an industry that I think oftentimes in a city and state like this, there's no real familiarity with the mining industry, and so that's had some advantage to us. But yeah, I mean, the reality is the state and city have some tough challenges, but it seems like everywhere there are different challenges, and I'll leave that one for our leaders to figure out.
What is, I'm going to follow up and maybe get them to reveal, what is Chicago's biggest weakness or biggest thing it needs to overcome?
Well, I'd say for optics and perception matter a lot, and as a public company with 15,000 shareholders around the world, people outside of Chicago see Chicago in the headlines for certain things that aren't necessarily reflective of what the city and the state really are all about, and so I fight that battle from time to time. Just being in the spotlight for reasons that aren't really representative of the good things.
Yeah. Leigh, Jaana?
I would say the fiscal situation, and again, I think companies can move here and thrive, and the city's thriving even amid this, and I don't think that should prevent anyone from doing business as usual that's not directly involved in it, but I think Chicago is an example of what many cities are going through right now, so I think that's one thing.
Jaana?
I have to go back to education, but I am biased. I am from Finland, which if anybody who follows the field, Finland tends to do very well on the PISA scores of education. And I think it is, I believe, very much the fundamental of the success. And I don't think it's unique to Chicago. I think it is a challenge in many US cities as well as in many cities around the globe. But I think that is what worries me when I look beyond the next 3 to 5 years. That really is who are going to be the leaders for who are going to take care of the cities and the business of politics, the financial decisions when we are older. And I think that for me would be the top priority.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, back here. Mm-hmm.
Hello, Bridget Gaynor. Kind of following up on the murmurs that I heard in the room around what our biggest issues is, which are schools. When you talk about attracting global talent and the millennials and those attracted by pet washing stations and all that, when you look at the cities across the globe, what is best places us for success? Is it your ability to attract a talent pool that can be global and mobile? Or is it the growing of your own? And how does that balance split off? Because there aren't unlimited resources. And how do you kind of look at moving into the next century successfully in one of the other strategies or a hybrid?
Well, for us, one consideration is we have I think people from six countries that work in our headquarters, from China to from Bolivia, from all these different places, and over half of the revenue in our business is from Spanish-speaking countries, and so to be here and have there's I think more Spanish spoken in our headquarters office than English. And you think about then what it takes to attract people from all those different cultures and backgrounds. It really cuts down the list of cities that can appeal to that broad of a spectrum of people. And so, every city has its strengths. But Chicago had some real, it's just such a large place and so diverse, and there's something for everybody. And that's really, and educationally, everybody at the headquarters here has their own approach, whether it's private school or public school. It's with a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old and one on the way in our house. We're certainly getting up the learning curve fast on all the different educational alternatives here, and it's amazing how many choices we have. So
we suspect you're going to be getting a phone call. We know who you're going to get a phone call when your child is born. Just the schools thing is, I get that question all the time, and as I said before, it's the billion-dollar question with keeping, at least the young family equation in the game. And I don't know, I've talked, this is anecdotal, but I've talked to lots of people in New York City who claim that the public school thing is working for them. you know, I live in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which is a very desirable neighborhood for families, and the public schools there are great, but the end result is that they're crammed. There's 3 of them, and they are just stuffed at the gills, and you know, 30 kids a classroom and all that stuff. So I'm not an expert on education, but I did, and I spoke with a developer who has a big office there in New York City, and he insisted that all of my workers are in their 30s, they all have families, they're all sending their kids to to public school. And, you know, here in Chicago, I mean, Chicago has wonderful schools, but are they, I mean, a lot of the best ranked schools in the state are here in Chicago, but they're either magnet schools or are they private schools? I'm not sure exactly. There are wonderful magnet schools in every city, but then you have to, you know, are you going to be able to get into them is the question. So I don't have the answers. If anybody here does, I'd be curious to hear.
Well, to the question of what does it take to, in the long term, to succeed, I must say I really like Bruce Gutz's quote from the Brookings. He quotes Dolly Parton as a guide to cities.
Whose quote is
Bruce Gutz from the Brookings Institution,
okay,
who heads the metropolitan program there, and he quotes Dolly Parton saying, "Find out who you are and do it with passion." And I have, in a way, there is no single blueprint for a city to be successful. Cities start with very different starting points. I mean, you're talking about the Mexican community here. That is a huge opportunity for many things. And it really is about finding what's right for you and doing it with passion. And doing it together in a way. Cities that pull to the same direction can really move mountains. And I have many examples. But cities who just fight over the size of the pie, they typically don't move very far.
We're going to take one more question over here.
Hi, thanks for a great discussion. My name is Carolyn Nowinski. You talked about education as one of those critical elements in the infrastructure, and a couple years ago, Jim Clifton of Gallup wrote in his book, Coming Jobs War, that it's going to be a bridge of big cities, universities, and powerful local leaders. And I wonder if you'd comment on higher education and the role that plays in jobs and city growth.
Higher education.
I have a quick answer. It is a great way to attract the world's global talent. That's what London is investing on. Frankly, I have a CEO of a Chinese company who went to school in Chicago and really wants to come back to Chicago. Where you studied, where you make your friends, that's where you want to come back when you have your business, when you take your family for vacation. I think it is a huge opportunity for growing global megacities.
From our perspective, retention of some of this young talent, we've got people now going to the business schools, graduate schools here at University of Chicago and Northwestern. And I mean, what a great retention tool for us, and what a great way to develop somebody further, have them come back and work with us. And it's a win-win. So that's certainly something we didn't have available to us before we moved here.
Yeah, and I'll add, I mean, Pattie and I actually were in a meeting with Mayor Emanuel earlier this year, and he used a term I had never heard before, which is labor certainty, which is kind of logical and obvious, but higher education is what gives the big companies labor certainty. So they have a pipeline of people to draw from in whatever industry or specialty that they need. And so that he actually said, I think he even said this, he said, I love that all the companies are coming, but you know, it's actually the education that the higher education institutions that I care more about, because
yeah,
you know, something like
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't want to convey that he was dissing companies
he was
anyway,
joking,
but
he was over making the point. But the higher education needs to serve you. I mean,
absolutely,
it needs to be there for you to come here.
So thank you, Leigh, Mitch, Jaana. This has been fantastic, and I feel like I'm coming to know Chicago better and better just in the last couple of years, and it really is a fantastic city, and congratulations for making it, you know, a better and better city each year, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.